Thank you so much, Katie. And yes, welcome everyone back here at the ITB studios for ITB Berlin Convention 2022 at the eTravel track. And the technology, is also impacting how companies are traveling, how everyone is traveling for work. And that's what we will be discussing in the next 25 minutes here. But I'm not alone. I have wonderful guests joining me, and I'd like to introduce them to you first, so we're all together, and then we can see what happens next. So please welcome with me together Tristan Smith. She's Vice President Commercial at Egencia. Tristan, thank you so much for tuning in and joining us here today.
Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. And then we have Andy Finkelstein. Is that correct? Finkelstein, did I pronounce it correctly?
Perfectly.
Perfect. All the way from the US, Senior Vice President, Global Agency Sales and Corporate Solutions at Sabre. Thank you so much, Andy, for being with us.
Thank you.
And last but not least, we have Jannik Wässa here from Berlin joining us. You're Managing Director at Comtravo. Recently in the media, I think many of us, especially the ones being engaged in the business travel sector, they read about it, acquired by TripActions, a growing partner from the US. So thank you so much for joining us as well. Looking forward to your input too.
Thanks, pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. And for this panel, we actually go about it a bit differently than the others. So Andy is you prepared something for us to kind of set the scene for us, so we know what we're going to talk about. And I'd say the stage is yours. Fill us in what your thoughts are on business travel and technology.
You bet. Thanks so much, Lea, and really honored to be here and alongside Tristan and Jannik. And we were just discussing amongst us, the opportunity to follow the exciting times of TikTok, followed by the even more exciting times of business travel. So I'm happy to be here with you today. I thought I'd just provide a little bit of context as, in the world as we see it. And the slide is a little bit of just a backdrop to that. First and foremost, this is a really important part of our business at Sabre, and we get to see this through the lens of a lot of the TMC partners that we have around the world and our leading position with those global TMCs, also through the lens of our relationships with corporations directly through Get There and other offerings that we have in that space. And, we firmly believe in the resilience of business travel and its return. And, we're already seeing great signs in early 2022. We've seen demand really pick back up in February. On a global basis, recovering to near 50% of 2019 levels and at an accelerating pace of recovery. So that's really encouraging to see. And from our viewpoint, not all that surprising because, we think it's so inherent to how business is done. The space is also really interesting from the standpoint that it's attracting new money. There's new entrants coming in, and certainly, as my other panelists can attest, seeing some top-end consolidation as well. And so it's an ever-changing dynamic landscape and really exciting to be a part of it. Recovery is going to take shape in different ways, and we can all probably prognosticate different outcomes. That's not all that worthwhile. But I think we can probably agree that the shape and nature of business travel is likely changed. Some of that's through just naturally what happened and how we evolved through the pandemic. And there's other parts of it that are kind of unrelated to the pandemic and just the way the business conducted is being changed. And there's other considerations. So, I'll be really interested to hear Jannik and Tristan's feedback on this. But at least from my vantage point, as I talk to many of our partners, I see a few themes kind of emerge that are relevant. One is we found new ways of working, and those have been really successful. But it's really hard to replace the in-person interactions. And, even as we gather here virtually, we'd all rather rub elbows, gather in small groups to talk about and share insights real time and certainly do that over some cocktails at a happy hour. There's just no replacing that level of connectedness. From a competitive standpoint, the moment your competitor shows up for an in-person meeting, for a top prospect, you're going to be back on the road and traveling to do the same. And so, business will continue to be very competitive. There's no replacing, what it takes to build relationships, build trust, and doing that in person. Those things will be kind of returned steadfastly, I believe. we'll see how work from anywhere, evolves and how that shapes travel. But, the need to drive company culture, align on strategic objectives, advance our inclusion and diversity objectives and initiatives, those are becoming harder and harder with a remote team. And so, I think travel is a key enabler, to really making that happen and fostering the company culture that we aspire to. It also has the potential of, having that continued convergence of business and leisure travel as people explore different ways to balance the work-life aspects and find ways of enjoying, life and experiences while also meeting their business, obligations. And then, two last themes I would say. One is sustainability is ever increasing in its importance. And so, while there's a lot that, will drive increased demand for business travel, there's also the consideration that many of our clients face which is we also aspire to do our part as it relates to sustainability initiatives. And there's a strong consideration on that front. And lastly, I think, through the pandemic, we've seen, that service has become paramount once again. There's a level of uncertainty. There's a question of, what the longevity of that is, but I think there's a value in service, disruption management. Those processes are, way too onerous, way too manual today. And so there's an opportunity, to drive more automation, more self-service, and do that through, some advanced technology solutions. So those are just a few of the themes. I guess I would end by saying, with that backdrop, it's my viewpoint that, the ones that will stand to win are ones that can address these problems through advanced technology solutions, through innovation, doing that at scale, at pace. Will best position them to win. And so you've got to figure out how to do that to make the experience for the traveler, the insights for the travel manager and the CFO and the chief procurement officer and the CHRO, really, really valuable. And so, excited to hear, Tristan and Jannik's point of view. And again, thanks for having us on today.
Well, thank you, Andy. That was very interesting points you were raising there. And I'm, of course, curious to hear what Jannik and Tristan have to say. And Tristan, when you listen to Andy, first of all, do you agree? Second, would you add something? And third, what stood out most for you from all these points mentioned?
So I think we're very aligned, right? I think all the things you're talking about, Andy, absolutely. I think the biggest one for me is the power of travel and the importance of being in real life. And yes, we're in business travel, and of course we're going to say that, but having done a bunch of business travel, particularly in the last 6 months and in an organization where culture is incredibly important, power of just seeing your colleagues in the office, in real life, bringing together global colleagues, you just can't beat it, the energy that it brings. And yes, we've gotten by on Zoom for the last 2 years, but, this is contagious. People want to get back there and be together in real life. I think, Andy, we're going to double click on a lot of the topics you talked about, no doubt, but absolutely, I think, demand and customer needs and sort of expectations of travel are very recognizable, and yet there's some tweaks and evolutions and things I think the pandemic has accelerated. I think many of the trends that were already there, things like sustainability, as you said, and it's an industry that's always evolving. Technology is absolutely at the forefront of changing it and shaking it up and meeting customer needs differently. We started at Egencia about 20 years ago of the mission of revolutionizing business travel through the power of technology. And I think that's just as true today. And obviously, we're not the only ones doing that. So fully aligned. I think the one area that the jury's a little bit out for me, I'm not sure, you touched a little bit on bleisure, I think, sort of mixing the sort of leisure and business. I haven't seen anything yet in the data that suggests it's changing, and travel managers, it hasn't been a topic of conversation for our travel managers a whole lot yet, but let's see, it may pick up as things rebound.
Right, thank you, Tristan. And Jannik, from your perspective, I mean, you're really like on the tech side, right? But also Comtravo is not only a tech provider. I know that you are also very keen to always emphasize that the service element that Andy also mentioned is a strong component, especially in the fragmented business travel world, right? So what's your take? What would you add, or what would you underline?
Yeah, I think fully agreeing and subscribing to anything that has been said so far by both Andy and as well as Tristan. So I think on the general trends, we very much agree. I think especially what you were saying, Lea, yes, we certainly believe that it's always a combination of two things, right? You need innovative technology. On the other hand, you still need a human support if it's really needed. And I think that was particularly visible now also during the pandemic, because there have been plenty of these cases that basically no technology in the world by now can handle. And I think what we are working on is especially that the technology can handle more and more of these cases. But there will always be the situation where you need that human support because you're stranded in the airport and you're frustrated. You don't want to talk to a bot, but you want to talk to a person that is actually, showing empathy and is taking care of you personally. And I think that is also what the pandemic has shown, that, it's the combination of the two things. And what we are particularly working on is making the technology mimicking a person more and more in more and more cases. So we can take off the load of an agent and basically make sure that an agent really then jumps in when it's really necessary, when they can really provide true value for the customer. But up until then, we want to take the technology doing that part of the job and also deliver an outstanding customer experience for the traveler.
Right. So you're probably also referring here to machine learning or automation, right? So is there other technology trends? If you stick with technology for a moment, is there something else you're seeing and you'd like to emphasize? Andy, is there another trend you'd add to that list?
I think that's a really relevant one, and it's applied in a lot of different disciplines. So you can think about that being applied in the case of service and disruption management. I think it's going to be a growing trend when you think about the evolution of NDC and the promise of a personalized offer. How does that actually come to bear, right? Today we have a very static environment of filed fares and very archaic system in many respects, and airline partners are challenging us to be more innovative retailers. That we are going to move to a different paradigm of offer creation. And what that means is TMCs are going to be competing on a new playing field of, how to show that they've got the unique content relevant for the corporate buyer. Certainly that, that uniqueness maybe hasn't come to bear yet, from where airlines are in that evolution. But I think that's going to be a growing trend, and the discipline of enabling those machine learning algorithms is going to be important in understanding context and journey aware, being aware of the traveler's journey and the context of their trip in promoting the right offer at the right time. And that can be pre-trip, in-trip, and I think as you add other elements, to think about the trip comprehensively. So I think that's probably the most, the single most important trend from a technology perspective, and I think its application is actually quite broad.
Right. So personalization in business travel, that sounds easy, but I imagine that's more difficult, right? Because Tristan, if I look at it, there's two players, at least if I, as a layman, look at it, there's a company you're working with, right? And then the actual traveler. So how to approach personalization in business travel?
Yeah, absolutely. And building on, I think, Jannik and Andy, because I completely agree with you, I think the number one trend is around how do you harness all this data? How do you harness the engagement? How do you use data science and machine learning? So I think we're fully aligned there. I think for us, our perspective of it is there's always multiple personas that you're solving for, right? There's the traveler and all the content and the personalization and the pieces that you were talking about. There's the travel arranger that actually we don't talk a lot, but a lot of travel is actually done on behalf of somebody else and they have unique needs, and how do you use the data and machine learning for them? And the one that's a little bit forgotten, I think, as well, is the travel manager, right? Or the person that's sort of managing the program. And actually a lot of what we've been investing in recently, in addition to the pieces you were talking about on the traveler side, but is around using that data and that intelligence to make the travel manager job easier. And I think that the pandemic has accelerated either the travel manager becoming strategically more important and having a bigger seat at the table, just given the value of travel and its contribution to sustainability, et cetera. Or they've become more stretched, they're doing more things, they've never been exposed to travel before and they've just said, here, manage travel. And so we've been trying to also think about products for the travel manager. If it's, how do you recommend what their policy should look like, or what is the dynamic pricing caps that you should put in the market? And so tools and insights that you can use from, all the hundreds of millions of data points you have across the site, big companies, small companies, how do you make recommendations to them based on, companies that behave like them? So agree, it's definitely around using that data for personalization for the traveler and the arranger, but also thinking about that other travel manager persona.
Right, very good. And I mean, that's a bit off now, but if you talk about technology and virtual reality, and there's voices out there, right? There have been prominent people saying business travel is dead, and we're doing everything virtually now. We have all the video calls. I personally don't believe that, but business travel is still happening, right? And if people could choose, they would always opt for the direct interconnection, I guess. But if we look at something like metaverse, for example, right? How is that changing? How companies are working together and how are they letting their teams travel? Because it's also about if they're allowed to travel, right? Not only if they want to, but do they actually have the policy that they can travel? Jannik, what's your take on that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, quite interesting enough. I just had my first meeting via metaverse a couple of days ago. And I think there was a very interesting experience on the one hand side, because obviously it's a completely new experience, right? You're in this virtual room, you can walk around, you can kind of mimic the situation that you're in a meeting room with multiple people, but you're not talking to everybody at the same time, but you move to one corner with a smaller group of people and just talk privately there, which I think is great because it's, to some extent, it's mimicking what you would do in real world. On the other hand, I think it's still lacking exactly this kind of feeling that you nevertheless have in this video call here, where you can look each other in the eyes, only virtual though, but that's something that is completely missing so far in the virtual reality, because in the end it's an avatar, right? So it's not showing your real you, it's not a projection of yourself, showing all your facial expressions and movements and so on, which I think is something that's clearly missing in this virtual world, because I think this is what creates trust in the end, right? This personal connection, this seeing each other, react to each other from facial expressions, from gestures and so on. And I think as far as that is not the case in the virtual reality, I think it's super difficult to really come to something close to the real world. So I think this is, from a technology perspective, still a couple of years out, where we're at a point where we can really kind of mimic this real world in the virtual world to an extent that's really close to a real world experience. But I think nevertheless, in probably 10 years down the road or something, will be a completely different state there.
Right. Any thoughts from you, Tristan or Andy, on that topic?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're definitely seeing our clients have a hybrid approach, as we all are, right? There are types of interactions that lend themselves to being in Zoom, right? Sort of regular one-to-one catch-ups, some updates and things. But you just cannot beat being in a room if you're trying to brainstorm or you're trying to build trust with a new, customer or supplier or... So there's a number of things. I just think the value of being in person and, as you said, Jannik, building that trust and honestly, sort of 1 or 2 minute chat in a kitchen and a tea break between a sort of big meeting can build more trust than having weeks and months of Zoom calls. So I think companies are going to have a bit of a hybrid. Yes, some things will stay on Zoom, but I think they're eager to get back out there and rebuild their connections between their teams and their suppliers and their customers and win new business. Right.
Andy, what do you think?
Look, I probably don't have a lot to add, but maybe connecting the 2 points a little bit between some of the things Tristan was mentioning previously. I think the role of corporate policy is going to inherently have to change. It's going to be more dynamic and have to consider kind of these new ways of working, new ways of interacting, and not just in terms of when you travel versus when you conduct things virtually, but even the nature of the in-travel experience. I think we will move to a place where the policy is going to have to be a lot more dynamic, and potentially is another area where the AI machine learning can actually play a role in defining what that is.
Right, very good. And initially, in your initial thoughts that you share with us, you mentioned it briefly that there's like legacy players, right? And there's consolidation happening, and then we have new entrants like TripActions or Comtravo. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that. Is that either or how will this ecosystem of players within the business travel technology space evolve? Tristan, what's your take on that? How will that look like in the next years?
Yeah, I think sort of simplifying to legacy versus new, it was appropriate probably, 5-10 years ago, I think, when digital was becoming a new thing and it was starting to disrupt. I think the reality is digital is everywhere at this point, right? Everyone comes to the table with some sort of digital solution. And quite frankly, as you said, Andy, consolidation is changing the dynamic, right? You've got sort of what people might call legacy or traditional players like Amex GBT buying Egencia, and incorporating that as part of its group offering. You've got TripActions buying legacy and traditional TMCs. So the lines are blurring, right? I think we're in a new stage for the industry as we go into the next decade. I think from an Amex GBT perspective, it's about choice, right? There are different customers that want to buy different options. Some want that turnkey integrated solution, service and technology, as you talked about, Jannik, right? The platform, and they want to go and they want to benefit from being part of something that has many customers, small and large, etc. But there are some that are still wanting to, pick their service, pick their OBT, pick their technology, etc. And that's going to continue to be an option. And that has historically been the sort of sweet spot of the more legacy TMC. So I think it's probably a little bit simplistic. It's more about, what are the unique things that different types of customers are looking for in their buying journey, and making sure that you've got the different options to offer to them.
Right. Jannik, what's your take on that? How do you see that evolving over the next years?
Yeah. On some points, I would probably agree with Tristan in the sense of, there's obviously different buyer personas, different kind of companies needing different solutions. So I fully agree to that. There's, still a lot of breadth of what the industry needs. And I think that will continue for some time. I think nevertheless that, if we think about what's going on in the industry and also see this consolidation, I think I would see, like, simplistically putting it, probably two different kind of players. So on the one hand side, we have technology companies that are kind of moving into travel. And on the other hand, we have travel companies moving into technology. And I think from that perspective, we have a very clear view on who will win that race in the long run, because, you can learn travel, but it's much harder to learn technology. So we believe that in the long run, it will be the technology players being the ones who is really accelerating, who are really driving innovation in this area now. And I think we also see this basically from the growth that is happening here in the different parts of the industry.
Right. Andy, what are you saying?
I was smirking a little bit. So from an extremely biased point of view, it's also true that look, this market's really fragmented still. So even as we talk about consolidation at the top end, the corporate travel ecosystem is massive. Ranging from everything that's unmanaged to lightly managed, and then these complex, multinational enterprise accounts. And the reality is, I agree that, to an extent, it's a technology arms race in terms of who will win. But it also doesn't mean that you have to build it on your own. And so this is where we feel like we have a great proposition in the network of TMCs we have around the world, small, medium, big, and how we can help enable them to meet their objectives and deliver that world-class service to their corporations, the travel manager, the traveler. But I think it's important to recognize just, the breadth of the corporate travel ecosystem, the segmentation. When you get out into the regions, you've even got, agencies that are hybrids, that have small online presence, a leisure offering and a corporate offering, and have very deep relationships with the customers that they serve. And so it's important to be thinking about the whole of that and how we serve that total corporate travel ecosystem.
Right. Thank you so much. We're out of time already. That went fast. I could keep on for longer. So thank you so much for joining me. Tristan Smith, was a pleasure to have you joining us, and Andy Finkelstein and Jannik Wässa. I wish you all the very best, and I'm looking forward to observe what's happening in the business travel space. And hopefully business travel will pick up even more in the next months and years to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone in the audience as well, for joining us. I hope you enjoyed that session. Make sure to connect with Tristan, Andy, and Jannik also on social media, and check out their websites of their companies to learn more about the field of business travel. I can tell you it's super interesting. And I hand back to Katie, because I think it's a wrap.